morning, this is Karen Johnson, and we are doing another version of our Proctors Historical Committee tapings, in which we preserve the history of Proctors Theater and the people who made Proctors what it is today. The date today is June 30th, 2014, and our guest is Fred Daniels, who has put in quite a few years in management in this theater during a very interesting time.
11 years.
11 years of your life. And
that's right.
All kinds of things. So, do you recall what year you came here?
I think it was 1992. So that's when I started. I had been working for a period of time at WMHT, and that's where I met Gloria Lemire, who at the time I came was the executive director here. And she and I were friends when I was working with her at WMHT, and she kept tabs on me after I went and transitioned to a couple of other places after WMHT. And when I heard from her next about Proctors is when I was working for a local film and video production company called Mountain View Productions. And Gloria had in her mind that she wanted to produce a big $1 million fundraiser on the stage with WRGB, and she had WRGB in tow. And she was thinking about a producer. She wanted someone to produce it. She knew I was working through WMHT and then now at this film and video production company, and she thought that perhaps I'd be interested in being the producer of the show. And I talked to my supervisor about it, and he said, that would be a good thing to do. You should do that. And so that is how I got reconnected with Proctors and with Gloria, and that was a big event that we put on the stage there. I think it was a 3-hour, locally produced, locally broadcast fundraising event, and I believe we did raise our $1 million. So that was my reintroduction to Proctors, right?
I came across recently some of the pages of script of it, and it's quite an amazing effort because, because of the live TV, everything was just by the minute.
Yes. Well, and it was just by the minute, and it had to be like that. Neil Golub was in the middle of it, and of course he was a pretty seasoned person for being on the stage and producing these fundraising events. I think he'd already been doing events for the Center for Disability Services, is what they're called now. And so he was very keen on that as well, and I think some of the big talent, Liz Bishop and Ernie Tatro, they were involved in it. So yeah, I mean, the staff at WRGB really got behind it. And I worked very closely with the director there, Margaret Coonrod, and she was the director, and I was labeled the producer. And I said to her one day, I said, Margaret, don't you think that, this is a big project. Don't you think I should be the executive producer? And she said, well, yeah, and then I'll be the executive director. And I said, okay, so we'll do it like that. That's the way it went down.
So you bought a great title.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And since you were successful, we know you deserved it.
Well, it was successful, and there's a lot of people who deserved that, and not the least of which was Gloria, because she just had such a sincere and earnest personality. And she was not particularly good on camera. She was kind of camera shy, but she definitely rose to the occasion on that night, and really, for the very limited time that she actually appeared on camera, because that was her requirement. I'm not interested in being the front person on this. She did a very nice job and a very sweet job, and of course everybody and their brother knew Gloria from many decades of working in media and being involved in civic groups for forever, a long time, and they really rallied to the fundraising event, and it was a great night.
And then how did you transition into employment?
Well, I went back to the salt mines at Mountain View Productions and continued to sell corporate videos, and which was my task there, until one day I got the call from Gloria, and she said, there's a marketing position here, and I want you to come and talk to me about it. So I did. And, it was fun standing on that stage during the fundraising event. And so, looking around the theater, I didn't really have a theater background, but I certainly had a marketing background, an MBA in marketing. And so to me, it seemed like a natural fit. And of course, I was crazy about Gloria and knew that she'd be a tremendous boss. And I teased her mercilessly because when she offered me the job, she told me the only lie she's ever told me. And
Which
that
was?
which was, everybody's like, which was? Yes, so she said, one of the great things about working here at Proctor's is that, we don't really do anything on the stage during the summertime, so everybody really has a pretty easygoing summer. What a lie. That was a joke. That was really something, so that's okay. But I got used very quickly to the pace of it all, and it was a great place to work. So I started as the director of marketing, and did that for 4 or 5 years, and then Gloria asked me to become the general manager, so I moved up and didn't get a better office, but I got a better title.
Well, speaking of your office, which I think is quite interesting,
Yes.
it was at the mezzanine level and then up a flight of
That's
stairs.
correct.
And tell us about that office.
Well, it was a great office because it was up above. It was the highest office in the building. And it also had a door out onto the roof and, a little like a fire exit door out the back there. But the stairs up to the office there were narrow and they would wind around and it was really a dangerous place to go up and down, especially if you're trying to move quickly. But it was a wonderful office, and Gloria was kind of like almost right underneath me. You're right, in the office downstairs. So I was within shouting distance.
But that office was reputed to be Mr. Proctor's apartment.
That's right. I'd forgotten that. You're correct.
And
yeah.
So he wasn't here that much, is what I've heard.
Yeah.
But when he came, that's where he stayed. So it had vestigial remains of a bathroom in it, didn't
Yes,
it? It didn't work.
That is correct. It did not work.
Probably the heat didn't either.
Well, whatever. I generated my own heat up there. We were very busy up in that office, so it was all good.
Okay. Because I remember the heat was a little bit, I had an office downstairs
Yeah.
next to Gloria's
Yeah.
at a certain point.
Yeah.
And the heat was a little scarce there. It came in under the floor. And in order to fix it, I remember Mr. Ed, they had to crawl down in this
That's
little
right.
hole.
That's right.
And
he would go because he was the smallest guy.
and it was like not attached,
Yeah.
and then they reattach it. I mean, I would say that working at Proctor's was always fun, but there was always a little wrinkle to it.
Well, that's really what made it fun and quaint as a place to work. And Proctor's is a big, sophisticated organization now, but in those days, we were busy making payroll, and we were sweating out every show, and we had a fraction of the productions that we would put on the stage that day in comparison to now. So every show that came in, we were hanging the payroll on the success of that show. So in this business, in the theater business, it's very mercurial. Shows come, they go. Some of the ones you think are going to do really well don't do well. The ones that you think, gee, why did we book this? Sell out. It's very hard to predict, and so that was always an interesting scenario. But the proceeds from the fundraising event really bought us the cash flow we needed, got us the opportunity to move forward several years towards the big historic preservation grant, which was a major part of what I was doing sort of midway through my time at Proctor's. And once we got the building, the auditorium, the seats, and the beauty of the theater itself, once we got that straightened out, our audiences really began to, we began to find them more successfully, and we got quite a bit of cachet, and we had a great run through that time period.
Did you talk to Gloria about booking shows often?
Gloria taught me everything about booking shows, and so we would do it together. She had a good instinct for it. She had quite a few connections in the industry, and I'm not quite sure that they came from having been connected with theater so much as she just developed them over time. Mm-hmm. And when you're booking shows, the show producers, mostly based down in New York at that time, well, they knew that this was a big theater with lots of seats and increasingly a noteworthy track record for successfully hosting events. So they would approach Gloria, she would push back, they would push in, and so there was quite a bit of, a lot of dancing going on all the time with the producers there, because she was very picky about the shows that she would bring in. because we couldn't afford to take a lot of risk. So she was cautious and careful, but I think a good booker. And it was always interesting to hear her talk about the final negotiations with these producers, because as in any production, it finally gets down to, you know, sort of the last 10%, and what are you trying to capture in the last 10%? And at that point, we weren't doing so much with regards to what do they call it? It's like a surcharge on the ticket, a ticketing fee, or the preservation fee. And for a number of years, that was the big push to protect the historic preservation fee, which I think was $1 or $1.50 on a ticket at that time, to protect that, keep that out of the hands of the producers. Because Gloria would also say, and I'm sure Philip Morris would say today, by the time you get done with these producers, all that's left for you is the popcorn proceeds, and that's about right.
And we don't usually show sell popcorn during big shows.
During big shows, right.
People may not realize that Gloria was one of the early arts people who booked shows. She ran the Colony Coliseum.
That's right, that's right.
And in fact, I was talking to a musician who's not so young, and he was saying how much he remembered her from the Coliseum. So she came here with quite a bit of experience, and one of the things she did is book shows on splits,
Right.
which Proctors doesn't do so much anymore.
Right.
But do you want to explain what a split is?
Well, sure. We would book shows on split, and that would be one of the negotiating points here, that they would come in, and after a certain amount was taken off the top just to pay the band, for instance. This was common with musical acts. And Gloria's real strength was musical acts because, of course, at the Coliseum, she did mostly musicals, where she booked there. After that, then there would be a negotiated split between the house and the producers. And so on our side of the equation, that was good because we didn't have to put any capital up front. And so that was important, especially in tight cash flow times. So the band would get paid at an agreed upon price right off the top, and then the split would go into effect, and Proctors would keep sometimes 40%, sometimes 50%, hardly ever 60%, and the artist would, the artist group would take away the other share. And the reason we liked that is because it gave us a toehold to get them to do things like produce television commercials or make radio spots or come a day early and make appearances around in the media, in the community, because they had a vested interest in the success of the show. So every time they sold another ticket, they get another 60%. So that was a useful technique.
And it cut the risk of the theater.
Totally cut the risk.
She also had agreements with some other theaters that when there was a 7-day, I don't know, what are they, 6 performance days?
Right.
That she'd send half of it to Rhode Island and half of it would come to Proctors, so we'd each have either 3 or 4 days.
Right, and it was, we were finding our audience at that time, and really uncertain about taking the risk. So producers would want us to book 8 performances in 6 days, and we'd be hesitant to do that. The producers were hesitant to do it, of course, because it was an extra setup and tear down, which was their cost, a cost they had to bear, and the transportation. So more commonly possible with smaller shows, pretty easy sometimes with shows that were more music oriented and less stagecraft oriented. Of course, all the shows now, what the audiences expect now is lots and lots of intense stagecraft. So it's a totally different business now, even from 15 years ago.
But I have to say, we haven't, well, this year with Book of Mormon, we had the experience of not having, many nights, not a seat in the house.
Right.
I remember one year with Gloria, though, we had 3 or 4 sold-out runs, and it was a very exciting time.
Exciting, that's
and
exactly
one of
right.
them was Annie.
Yeah,
and
that's
probably
right.
Cats. Cats, we just sold out every time we had it.
Yeah.
Not sure that's still true, but...
No, but Cats was hot at that time, and it was really great. I think that the other thing that has sort of changed, but was very common at that time, is the big stars would travel with these shows. And Gloria knew a lot of them because a lot of them were musicians, and they would, take sign on for a certain part of a run with Annie or something like that. And so, the big stars would come, and she'd know them all personally from her musical background. So that doesn't happen quite so often now, and I think that's really for a couple of reasons. There's, television and the movies are more lucrative for the big stars when you make it, but also with the level of talent now with people whose name you really don't know that much, it's just astonishing, and it wasn't quite so well developed at that time. So the feeder program for the actors and actresses to be in the Broadway shows is much more developed now and was not so much at that time. So there was a real distinction to be made between the A touring groups and the B touring groups. Some of those B touring groups were like, they were like D touring groups, really. And
Today,
it was really rough.
You wouldn't put up with them today.
No, exactly right.
People wouldn't.
That's exactly right. They
So when
wouldn't
you
accept it.
went from doing marketing to general manager, what were some of your duties? Did you have strange duties sometimes when things happened?
Well, the biggest duty that I took on, as is often the case in nonprofit management, you keep your old job and you just add new responsibilities.
Okay.
Maybe if you're lucky, you might get a little extra staff, but that didn't happen for a couple of years when I was first became the general manager. So mostly it just elongated my day because a big part of my responsibility was to be there at night to coordinate with the unions, coordinate with the act backstage, and to get the audience in and make sure the volunteers were doing what they were supposed to be doing. So I found that I was many times here until 10 o'clock at night, 3 and 4 days a week. So that was a big part of the general manager's responsibility. So largely, the big new added task was sort of the operations side of that equation. And we had operations managers and so on and so forth, but somebody had to make the decision. Gloria wanted to be able to be the person of last resort if there was a truly difficult, challenging sort of problem that evolved. She expected me to handle most of it and just to get it done. Gloria was not young at that time. I don't remember exactly how old she was when she passed, but she also needed someone who was a little, with
Could
stronger legs.
Make those stairs.
Make those stairs all the time. So she was happy to have a younger person, and I think I was in my 40s at that time, maybe, to be able to stay longer and do all that business. So some of it was managing the unions was always something that you had to keep a close eye on to make sure that there wasn't going to be some sort of a violation of the rules or that the production company coming in wasn't asking for something that was going to trigger some sort of a new call. And all of that was something that we had to keep a very close eye on. Settling with the production manager for the receipts of the night, that was something that fell to me.
Tell me a little bit about what settlement involved.
Well, the money has to be accounted for in the end, and so we would have our box office receipts. The production manager would be having his expenses, which were allowed, and every contract would have pages and pages and pages of details about the allowed expenses and the disallowed expenses. And the process of coming to agreement on those sometimes was really hard. So some of those production managers were tough as nails as well. And in my particular case, many times they knew much more than I did. They were much more experienced than I was. So they had their tricks, and I had to develop my tricks. And there had to be some trust around the numbers, so that they left with the money they were owed and not a penny more. We were kept all the money we were owed and not a penny more. Sometimes those sessions would be 2 and 3 hours to get that done. So 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, you're
And
finally
on a
finishing.
multi-night run, did you settle just once at the end?
Oh, no, you settle every night. So, and then, everybody agrees and signs off on tonight's receipts. And going forward, then you ultimately get to the final night and then the final settlement overall. But, there was a lot a lot to know. And so you really had to be around to understand, well, yeah, that did actually happen. What's being claimed, in fact, did happen. Yes, I do understand why there had to be extra people brought in to get this emergency thing taken care of. And we were still wrestling with a very shallow stage at that time. So we were motivated to bring in bigger shows. But as the shows got bigger, they pushed against the back wall of the stage much more. So oftentimes there was a circumstance at our expense solely where an additional call had to be made to bring in crew because something that might otherwise be done with automation had to be pushed in, or where something might have to actually be made on the fly in order to fit in the space that we had. Because even though the producers had our stage specs, they wanted to play our hall, and they would just make the decision themselves, we'll fix that when we get there. We'll make that happen. Now, there are some instances where we would have big shows in and major pieces could not be fit on our stage and could not be played. So that was a challenge for our audience development issue because people knew a lot about these big shows, and so they'd come to see some big piece of stagecraft, and it couldn't happen on our stage, and that was a public relations problem that we had.
And that was really one of the bigger motivations for trying to raise the money for the big stage.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. And shows just kept getting bigger and kept getting bigger. I think that most shows now are as large as they can be. The ones we want to bring here now are of the largest varieties because our stage can handle it with the depth that it has. So that was towards the end of my time. I did some of the initial exploration about the possibilities of expanding the stage. And of course, that happened then subsequent to my departure. But getting that research done, figuring out where do we make the hard choices, where are we landlocked? You know, we can only go back so far. How's that going to work? Pieces of the old theater that were displaced as a result of pushing back the wall. How do we recapture those spaces, and where's that going to happen in a way that was logical to the workflow? All of that stuff really required quite a bit of attention.
I remember when the board first considered expanding the stage, they heard a figure from a consultant, and they said, I don't think so.
Yeah, not going to happen.
That's a little more than we
That's right.
were really capable of. And then as time passed, they realized that it had to be done.
Well, it was going to be the thing that drove the possibilities of growth. And of course, look at the growth that's occurred. And that is in large part due to the fact the stage is that much bigger. And we've also developed here at Proctors, has developed other stages.
Now, you also got involved in a sort of a political controversy with the Palace Theater because there was quite a lot of talk about who got the big stage and what happened. What do you recall about that?
Well, the folks at the Palace, which is a city-owned facility, they definitely wanted to have the larger stage, and our position was pretty straightforward, really twofold. Proctors had the audience track record with both the producers and the region, regionally speaking, and this is the venue where people would turn for Broadway and those kinds of productions. But the big challenge with the Palace is that they were landlocked by a major hill. Right behind their stage is a major hill, and the difficulties of expanding that stage at that location were much greater than the challenge of expanding it here at Proctors. In the end, it wasn't up to Proctors to tell the Palace what they could or couldn't do, nor was it, the same from the Palace telling Proctors what they could or couldn't do. It really came down to who pulled the trigger first, and it was the Proctors management that pulled the trigger first.
Well, it was quite exciting. I remember press conferences with Jerry Jennings and people running out with signed agreements, and it was highly dramatic when we were in the middle of it.
Well, you remember some of those details better than I, so
But,
perhaps I blocked them out.
Probably that would be a good strategy,
That's right.
I think, to
Yeah.
block them out.
Yeah.
But you know, over time, and that was really in the very beginning of when we were talking about regionalism and in this area. I mean, we were just beginning to talk about it. So did you meet any stars of note and have any interactions with any of them?
Well, yes. So Robert Goulet, he came 2 or 3 times when I was here with Man of La Mancha, and he was always a gentleman and a very nice guy. Gregory Hines, who was a acclaimed dancer, and I'm trying to think of the show that he was here with. It would be one that you would logically think he would be with. He was a nice guy, but kind of tricky to deal with. I didn't meet very many more of the stars because really that was sort of Gloria carved that position out to be the person who would have the connection to the stars. I think that the other piece that happened is that they would often have people around them, so you would be working with their people, and mostly you'd be wanting to encourage a star to come to the Guild Room after the show and meet the donors, and so you'd want to make sure that that they could do that. So the best way to do that really was to make sure that their person was in agreement with that, and then they would generally carry that. So then you'd have an opportunity to meet them. Now, Bernadette Peters, the thing that struck me about Bernadette Peters is that she was just petite, very small. I mean, I'm a large person, so she just was very, very small. I remember my daughter, who kind of grew up at Proctors, was with me when we met Bernadette Peters in the Guild Room after the show. And Jessica, my daughter, was just floored. Of course, she wanted to be a Broadway star, and she had a good voice and all of that. She wanted to sing for Bernadette Peters, and so that was really a special moment. But the stars can also be very tricky. There's no doubt about that. It's rough. It's tough being on the road, and they're tired. So they really don't want a lot of fooling around, most cases. And sometimes they were just sort of unreasonable about things. So,
and you were the guy that had to solve the problems.
I had to solve the problems. So one of the things that I remember about one of the stars is that he insisted on having a black limousine, and all we could find was a white limousine, and we just couldn't find a black limousine. So the person who had to explain to him about why he had to accept a white limousine was me, and that was not a great day. He was not happy at all.
Well, you do have a lot of sympathy for them because of the way they live.
Sure.
People see their life is so glamorous, but it really isn't.
No, it's a lot of traveling overnight and a lot of sitting backstage. And, you know, I mean, the backstage area is pretty
Dark.
utilitarian. You know, it's very basic. So, I mean, even Hollywood stars, you know, they sit in their trailers and they're waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen. And so a star, he's not out there during tech rehearsal and checking everything out. He might wander around if he's bored, or she, but you know, they're just waiting. They're waiting for the show. And they do their performance, then everybody wants to press the flesh with them and all of that, and that gets old pretty fast, I would imagine. So yeah, I mean, it's a rough life. So you'd want to make sure that they were well cared for and felt good about the theater, because that was a way for them to give a better performance.
And also inspire them to come back.
That's right.
If you wanted them to. Well, you and your whole family came to, I mean, you were here settling and getting everything, but you and your family came to many, many shows.
Well, we were here for a lot of shows, and that's because I was already here, that's true. And because my daughter Jess really just loved the theater and loved Broadway, and she worked here at Proctors for some years. And she still today, you know, she subscribes to Sirius XM radio, and it's got the Broadway channel, and she listens to the
loves
Broadway
the
channel
music.
all the time, and is still coming to shows regularly. So she got bit by the bug, the theater bug for sure, and did voice training and so on and so forth. And you know, I mean, things.
You probably even got to like all these shows a
Well,
lot.
I like all the shows. There's no doubt about it, and you know, some of them were better to see more than once than others, and you would invariably have to see them a lot. So I know
So
them
it's
all.
probably true the seventh time of anything is
It's a little too much.
tedious.
Yeah, just a little too much. You're finding something else to do.
Fred, do you have anything else you'd like to tell us about Proctors and your knowledge of it?
Well, I think one of the long and involved activities that really sticks in my mind as being quite memorable was the whole process of actually doing the restoration. You know, we had the big fundraiser on the stage, and we raised some dollars, and then we got the big historic preservation grant. And you would remember better than I, but that was certainly around $1 million, maybe a little bit more, something along those lines. And the process of making decisions and working with the architects, the historic preservation architects, on how to preserve the building best with the dollars that we had, because of course, even with large grants and the abilities that we had internally, it still wasn't enough to do everything that we wanted to do. But ultimately, the decisions were made, I think, in the right way. Most of the money went to the ceiling and the seats. That's the audience experience. And some of the money went to the stage area. But the process of watching them erect the scaffolding in the auditorium to get up to the ceiling, and then the artisans who came in to do the gold leaf work, I found that to be so fascinating, and that the bridge between the architectural renderings to the specifications that were required to the crews that had to then be retained and then capped by the artists, the artisans who had the very specific historic and preservation skills and techniques. I just found that be so fascinating to be a part of that. It's some of the fondest memories I have of my time here at the theater. And of course, the preservation piece has lasted. It's been durable, and the ceiling still looks as good as it did back in those days. I'm hoping that Proctors is going to refurbish the seats sometime soon. Some of them are getting a little tough on the fanny, and
They look
so
good, though.
you know they definitely look good. But you know, those seats do have to be changed over periodically. But all of that process to me was just really fascinating to engage in. So that was I learned a lot about historic preservation. Did a little consulting in that area after the fact, and so that was really a very exciting project.
It's fun when you learn that gold leaf, which isn't totally gold anymore, that they put the glue on, they paint it with glue, and then they kind of blow it over.
Literally, blow it over.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
And then they take something that looks like an old nylon stocking,
That's
and
right.
all the little flakes come off the edge, and
That's
the
right.
part that's still there and looking beautiful.
Yeah.
So in 2014, we have what may be our final painting grant
Oh, good.
from Parks, and it's going to take care of the mezzanine, the front of the boxes,
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
and really lift up, you know, everything that's left, and then it will be gone through one time. And then the one that you were involved in, you remember in the front of the theater there was a molding, and it was truncated in the corner,
Yes.
and no one quite knows how that happened, but
Yeah.
it got fixed.
Good. Yes, on the left side, I think it is. So it did get fixed. That's good.
Because you weren't here during the days when the original painting of the ceiling, when back in like 1978 and 9, and they had all scaffolding up and they were painting away, And the board was told GE wanted to use the theater, and they said, too bad, the scaffolding's coming down, whatever you've done, and
That's
we're going to
right.
let GE in this place because it's really important to our future. And it proved to be true.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so that's right. So some of that ceiling was undone for a number of years. I remember that.
So the life of a theater is very organic and changes, and it's exciting.
Well, I had a great run here at Proctors, and it was a seminal part of my professional development, and I learned things here at Proctors from Gloria and you and others that I still use in my profession every day, all the time. So it was a great experience.
Fred, thanks so much for being here, and thanks to our friends who are watching this on Monday, June 30th, 2014, as we've talked to Fred Daniels, former general manager of Proctors Theater. And thank you so much, Fred, for being
My
with
pleasure.
us.
Happy to be here. Thank you.